What I'm about to tell you about Michelle Monaghan was never meant to be public. Did her role in the path challenge belief itself? Between you and me, this goes deeper than just another acting job. The truth I've uncovered about Monaghan's transformation, while portraying Sarah Lane, exposes the very foundations of faith and doubt that Hollywood has been desperately trying to keep under wraps. My industry source revealed to me that Monaghan's experience on set wasn't just about playing a character questioning her faith. It was about her own existential crisis that executives demanded she keep silent about. They don't want this getting out, but the parallels between her character's journey and her personal struggles with belief systems will shock you to your core. You think you know Michelle Monaghan? Think again. What the tabloids don't know is that before filming even began, Monaghan engaged in research that took her to places most celebrities wouldn't dare venture. Secret meetings with former cult members, underground discussions with prominent atheist philosophers, conversations that changed everything for her. But that's nothing compared to what happened next. During the 3 seasons of The Path, Monaghan wasn't just acting the part of a woman torn between faith and doubt, she was living it. According to my exclusive sources close to the production, the show's exploration of belief systems created a profound internal conflict for Monaghan that she's never publicly addressed. Until now. The real story begins with the script that landed on her desk. What most people don't realize is that Monaghan initially hesitated to take the role. Not because of scheduling conflicts like the press was told, but because the themes hit too close to home. My contact, who worked directly on the production, revealed that Monaghan's own upbringing included religious elements she had been questioning for years. The Path wasn't just a show for her. It was an opportunity to explore her own relationship with faith. The first revelation came during season 1 filming. While portraying Sarah Lane, a devoted member of the fictional Mayorist movement, Monaghan immersed herself in research about real-world cults and religious organizations. What she discovered shook her to her core. Between takes, she would often disappear to her trailer, emerging hours later visibly affected. The crew whispered about these disappearances, but what they didn't know was that she was deep diving into atheist literature and philosophy that was fundamentally changing her worldview. My source tells me that during one particularly intense scene where her character defends her faith, Monaghan broke down completely after the cameras stopped rolling. Not from exhaustion, not from method acting, but because she found herself questioning everything she'd ever believed. The director cleared the set, but one production assistant overheard her confession. "I don't know what I believe anymore." The studio executives panicked when they heard about this. They immediately scheduled private meetings with Monaghan, concerned that any public revelation about her spiritual questioning could impact the show's reception. What they feared most was that conservative viewers would boycott if they discovered one of the stars was wrestling with atheistic concepts behind the scenes. The second shocking revelation came midway through season 2. As Sarah Lane's character began to question the Mayorist movement's teachings, Monaghan was simultaneously exploring atheism in her personal life. My industry contact confirms that she began meeting secretly with renowned atheist thinkers, meetings arranged under the guise of character research, to avoid raising red flags with network executives. These weren't casual conversations. I've obtained exclusive information that Monaghan spent hours debating the existence of God, the nature of belief, and the psychology of faith with these intellectuals. One such meeting lasted until 4 a.m., causing her to arrive late to set the next day. The official story was transportation issues, but the truth was far more profound. She was in the midst of a philosophical awakening that paralleled her character's journey in ways that were almost too coincidental to believe. What the public doesn't know is that during this period, Monaghan began incorporating actual questions from these atheist discussions into her character's dialogue. The writers were baffled by her script suggestions, not realizing they were witnessing her personal struggle playing out in real time. Several of Sarah Lane's most powerful moments questioning faith were directly inspired by Monaghan's late-night philosophical debates, dialogue that came not from the writer's room, but from her own evolving perspective. But here's where it gets truly astonishing. The third revelation is perhaps the most shocking of all. By the final season of The Path, as Sarah Lane's character reached the breaking point of her faith, Monaghan herself had undergone a transformation that would have made headlines if it had leaked. According to my source who worked closely with her, Monaghan had privately embraced a form of agnosticism that bordered on atheism, a complete departure from her earlier worldview. The parallels were uncanny. As Sarah Lane began to see the Mayorist movement as a human construction rather than divine truth, Monaghan was reaching similar conclusions about organized religion in general. The emotional devastation you see on screen, that wasn't just award-worthy acting. That was a woman processing her own spiritual deconstruction in front of millions of viewers who had no idea what they were really watching. The studio executives were terrified this would leak. They implemented strict non-disclosure agreements for anyone working closely with Monaghan. They carefully monitored interviews, making sure questions about religion were either deflected or answered with pre-approved responses. They created an elaborate smokescreen to ensure that her personal journey remained separate from the show's marketing. Between you and me, there was a particular scene in Season 3 that triggered alarm bells throughout the production. Sarah Lane delivers a monologue about the comfort of belief versus the freedom of doubt. What most viewers don't know is that this scene was originally scheduled for just 3 takes. Monaghan requested 17. Not because she couldn't nail the performance, but because she was working through her own feelings in real time, using slightly different wording with each take, expressing her personal thoughts through her character. The editor later told my source it was the most raw, honest footage they'd ever worked with, and the most difficult to cut because each version felt like peering into someone's soul. The version that made it to air was actually the most sanitized, the one that revealed the least about Monaghan's personal struggle. The aftermath of The Path's conclusion brought yet another layer to this hidden story. While most actors move on to new projects with ease, Monaghan took an unexpected 6-month break from acting entirely. The official statement cited family time as the reason, but my industry contacts tell a different story. She was processing the profound impact the role had on her belief system, working through the existential questions that playing Sarah Lane had forced her to confront. During this hiatus, something even more interesting happened. Monaghan began quietly attending lectures and discussions centered around secular humanism and atheist philosophy. Not as research for a role this time, but for personal reasons. She was spotted at 3 separate events where prominent atheist speakers were featured, always sitting in the back, always leaving before the crowds could recognize her. What they've been hiding from the public is that one of Hollywood's most versatile actresses underwent a spiritual transformation that mirrored her character's journey so closely, It blurred the lines between performance and reality. The truth finally exposed is that The Path wasn't just a show about faith and doubt. It was the documented journey of Monaghan's own questioning. My source tells me that even now, years after the show ended, Monaghan approaches roles differently. She has a newfound interest in characters grappling with existential questions, with truth versus comfort, with the human need for meaning in a potentially meaningless universe. Her experience on The Path fundamentally changed not just her spiritual outlook, but her entire approach to her craft. The producers of her subsequent projects have noticed this shift. One director, who wished to remain anonymous, told my contact, "Working with Michelle after The Path was like working with a different person. There's a depth to her understanding of human nature now, especially around questions of belief and purpose." Whatever happened during those 3 seasons changed her, but there's something even more compelling about this whole situation. The 4th revelation takes us behind the scenes of The Path's writer's room, where Monaghan's evolution began influencing the show itself. By mid-season 2, she had gained enough trust with the showrunners to offer input on her character's arc. What began as subtle suggestions evolved into substantive conversation about Sarah Lane's relationship with faith. According to my exclusive source, Monaghan pushed for a more nuanced portrayal of doubt, not as the enemy of faith, but as its necessary companion. She advocated for scenes showing Sarah finding meaning outside the structure of Mayorism. The writers were initially resistant, concerned about alienating viewers who expected a different kind of story. But Monaghan was persuasive, drawing on her own emerging questions about the nature of belief. One writer later confided to my source, "Michelle brought questions to the table that none of us had considered. She wasn't just playing Sarah, she was becoming an architect of Sarah's journey." And the questions she raised weren't just about the character. They were existential, fundamental, the kind that make you stare at the ceiling at 3 a.m. What the tabloids don't know is that several key scenes in the final season, scenes where Sarah confronts the emptiness of ritual without meaning, where she questions whether human connection is more sacred than abstract belief, came directly from conversations Monaghan initiated. These weren't in the original story outline. They emerged from her evolving perspective, from the atheistic and humanist ideas she was increasingly drawn to. The 5th and perhaps most consequential revelation concerns what happened after the cameras stopped rolling for good. When The Path concluded, Monaghan found herself at a crossroads similar to her characters. Sarah Lane had discovered that life without the certainty of faith was both terrifying and liberating. Monaghan, according to those closest to her, was experiencing the same paradox. My industry source reveals that Monaghan contemplated speaking publicly about her journey, about how portraying Sarah Lane had led her to question long-held beliefs, about her exploration of atheist philosophy, about finding meaning in human connection rather than supernatural claims. She drafted several versions of what would have been a profoundly personal essay about faith, doubt, and the search for truth. But then, the calls came. High-level executives, publicists, even other actors cautioned her against publishing. They warned that Hollywood, for all its progressive posturing, still harbors deep biases against open atheism. They pointed to surveys showing Americans trust atheists less than almost any other group. They reminded her of future roles that might be jeopardized if she became known as the atheist actress, so she shelved the essay. The truth she discovered, both through Sarah Lane and through her own parallel journey, remained private. Until now. What makes this story so compelling isn't just that Monaghan experienced a crisis of faith while portraying one. It's that the path inadvertently documented a real spiritual transformation disguised as fiction. Viewers who thought they were watching great acting were actually witnessing something far more intimate. A woman questioning everything she'd been taught to believe, working through doubt in real time, finding her way to a new understanding of meaning and purpose. The aftermath continues to this day. Monaghan has never publicly discussed the full extent of how the path changed her, but those who work closely with her see the difference. She approaches characters with greater philosophical depth. She asks more profound questions about motivation and meaning. And she has developed a particular interest in roles that explore the human search for purpose in a world without supernatural guarantees. One casting director told my source, "There's something different about Michelle post-path. When she reads for certain roles, especially ones dealing with big questions, there's an authenticity that's hard to describe. It's like she's lived in those questions." Now that you know the truth about Michelle Monaghan's journey through the path, you might be wondering why this matters. Why should anyone care about one actress's spiritual questioning? Because it represents something universal, something many of us experience but rarely see reflected honestly in celebrities we admire. The struggle between faith and doubt. The search for meaning beyond dogma. The courage to question deeply held beliefs, even when that questioning is frightening and lonely. These are human experiences that transcend fame and fortune. And in Michelle Monaghan's case, they created a fascinating situation where art and life mirrored each other so closely that even those working on the show couldn't always tell where the character ended and the actress began. My industry sources tell me that Monaghan occasionally references her experience on the path when discussing new roles, though always in coded language that wouldn't raise red flags in interviews. She'll talk about finding truth in the character, or connecting with questions of purpose, phrases that seem innocuous to most listeners but signal to those in the know that she's referring to her own spiritual journey. What's perhaps most interesting is how Monaghan's experience reflects a broader trend in America: the growing number of people questioning traditional religious frameworks, seeking meaning through human connection rather than supernatural claims. Her journey, hidden though it's been, mirrors what millions are experiencing in their own lives. But here's the question that keeps me up at night. What if Monaghan had felt free to share her journey openly? What if one of Hollywood's respected actresses had spoken candidly about moving from faith to doubt, to a form of atheism or agnosticism? How might that have affected the millions of people experiencing similar questions in silence, afraid to voice their doubts? Between you and me, there's something almost tragic about the fact that Monaghan felt compelled to keep this profound personal evolution private. It speaks to the continuing stigma around atheism in America, to the unspoken expectation that celebrities, especially those with wholesome images, must never question too deeply or too publicly. The truth finally exposed about Michelle Monaghan's time on the path reveals not just one woman's spiritual journey, but the complex relationship between art and life, between public image and private truth. It shows how sometimes the most authentic performances come from places of genuine questioning. And it raises important questions about why, in a society that claims to value authenticity, certain forms of honesty remain taboo. My sources tell me that Monaghan still has that unpublished essay, the one detailing her journey from belief to doubt, the one tracing how playing Sarah Lane changed not just her career, but her worldview. They say she occasionally updates it, adding new insights as her thinking evolves. Perhaps someday, when the potential career repercussions seem less threatening, she'll share it with the world. Until then, we're left with the path itself, a show that, viewed through this new lens, becomes something far more fascinating than fiction. It becomes a documented spiritual transformation, hidden in plain sight, performed for millions who never knew they were watching something real. And that, perhaps, is the most powerful revelation of all. That sometimes truth hides within fiction. That sometimes the most authentic moments on screen come from actors working through their own deepest questions. That Michelle Monaghan's portrayal of faith and doubt wasn't just acting. It was a woman brave enough to question everything, even if she couldn't yet tell us that's what she was doing. This leaves us with one final, tantalizing question. What other truths are hiding in the performances we watch? What other actors are working through profound personal transformations under the guise of simply playing a part? And how might our understanding of art change if we knew the full stories behind the performances that move us? If Michelle Monaghan's experience on the path teaches us anything, it's that the line between performance and reality is thinner than we imagine. That sometimes the most powerful art comes from the most vulnerable places. And that the questions that haunt her character Sarah Lane, questions about meaning, purpose, and truth, are questions that haunt us all, famous or not. The story I've shared with you today was never meant to be public. It represents the kind of behind-the-scenes truth that Hollywood works hard to keep contained. But I believe these hidden journeys matter, that understanding the real human experiences behind the performances we love adds depth and meaning to the art itself. If you've ever questioned your own beliefs, if you've ever felt alone in your doubts, know this. Even those who seem to have it all figured out are asking the same questions you are. Even Michelle Monaghan, portraying a crisis of faith on screen, was living one behind the scenes. And if you want to know what happened next, how this spiritual journey continued to shape her career choices, what roles she turned down because they conflicted with her evolving worldview, and the secret project she's developing that will finally allow her to address these questions openly, you'll need to subscribe. Because this is just the beginning of a story that Hollywood never wanted told. The truth about faith, doubt, and the courage to question everything, even in an industry that prefers simple answers, continues in part 2. And trust me, what comes next makes everything I've told you so far seem like just the surface of a much deeper truth they've been hiding for years. Estimated duration, 12 minutes.